The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. This is the Agile Coaching Network. My name is Ray Arell, and we do get a lot of different people calling in here. This is not just a U.S.-centric call. We get people from Europe, we get people from Asia, we get people from also Portland, Oregon, which I think is a part of, I think it's still a part of the United States. But, what we're here to do is we're here to go look around the problem of, and also the benefits of what we do in actually coaching Agile adoptions within teams, look at, what's working, what's not working, share great stories. It is a virtual park bench, meaning that our goal here is to hear from everyone on the call. But if you want to just sit back, that's okay as well. But we really want to get your opinion on these things. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. The top question up on Slido is how do we motivate a team whose product has been signed off, but still needs to maintain it with new features? So I take this question to meaning that I am on a maintenance team. I'm not sure if others get that same impression. And now here's a team that has to basically work on other people's, primary features, and there to maintain it and add new features as necessary. And that's a difficult position sometimes for some teams because it's not the newest, the greatest, and you kind of feel like the B team. But in reality, one of the ways that I've used to motivate teams like this is just to understand that this is current revenue. And this is what we're making money on today. And I think leaders as well as team members that are working on such a product need to, really embrace that this is where we're making our money right now. What do other people think?
I wouldn't mind exploring the problem behind this a little bit more, but do you think there's a perception here that being on a maintenance team that's adding new features isn't as, sexy, exciting as a brand new product team? Well,
I've been on teams like this before, and what typically occurs is the general manager is up on a stage at a business update meeting, and they're talking about all the new stuff,
Yeah.
And I think that might roll into it a little bit.
One of the other phenomena that we see frequently is that oftentimes, when organizations create a new team to work on the new product, it's perceived as being the better place, right? They pick the supposedly smartest people, the quote-unquote best coders, which I don't know what all that stuff means, but that does actually seem to happen, leaving behind people who are supposedly better equipped to just do maintenance work, and I've even heard comments, well, so-and-so can't do design, so we're not going to put them on the new team, which I've always thought was just nonsense. But I think that's where it starts. To your point, Ray, it is about, too, that upper management gets up and they tend to talk about the shiny new coin rather than talking about what makes money. They often call these teams business as usual. I've been in several organizations that do that. I always encourage those teams to rename themselves. Who the heck wants to be called BAU? Nobody.
That's an awful name, business as usual.
Yes. And I've argued with other senior leaders. They're like, no, that's the BAU team. I said, no, actually they've renamed themselves and they prefer to be called, name your team, whatever.
The revenue team.
I think there's another thing that we can do as leaders, and that is to make the team aware of how much revenue they're supporting on a regular basis, right? Like the same thing they do with brand new products. I'll often have some sort of a big visible chart that says, yes, we sold X amount of brand new product, whatever. Make sure the team gets exposure to what are the day-to-day numbers and how are they contributing to day-to-day, right? And I find a lot of people can kind of roll with that and they understand it.
Right.
And then you can even build a bravado around, well, yes, we're keeping the lights on. We don't know what you guys are over there doing, playing. You've been, working on something for a year now. You have no product. Meanwhile, we keep the shop going. So
Yeah, and it's kind of unfortunate that it has to become an us versus them type of thing, which is, and I think this is where I encourage team rotations, which is, there's this concept of, working on a product from, inception all the way till completion. And the question is completion also through some period of maintenance as well, which is, I've seen teams inherit, the A team's work, if I use that, loosely, and they feel like they're having to go through now and do all the cleanup, meaning that they got it to market on time, but they didn't exactly use all the greatest coding practices in the world in order to get to that point. And the maintenance team is sitting around now playing whack-a-mole with technical debt. And that's an unfortunate place to be. It's kind of demeaning in some regards.
So the other phenomenon I see occur a lot is just before the product gets ready to go live, they bust up the team that was supporting it. The thing isn't live yet, so they don't even really know just how good it is or isn't. And meanwhile, half the people are shuffled off to the next new thing, right? So there isn't even adequate people to support what was there.
Right. I like Microsoft's plan, and I don't know if they still have this, so if anyone's still connected with Microsoft could chime in to say whether or not they do this. But they have the policy that you own your code for 5 years, meaning if you wrote it and there's a defect found in it, you get to come back and fix it, and so you still have that ownership of what you do. And I think at Google, it even goes in further, which is you own it for life, meaning it's your code. You should not rely on you might have a maintenance person help you with that, but you need to basically come in and fix your product, because it is your product, and continue that ownership chain. Dan, did you have something on this?
Yeah, just to pivot a bit. Every time I get a question on motivation, my mind almost always goes to Daniel Pink's work and Jonathan Haidt's work, the TED Talk on autonomy, mastery, and purpose, if people want to look that up. And so I think about, how do we get a team like this to increase their their sense of purpose. I think we kind of covered that already, but, making it visible and how much, perhaps money or how much value they're delivering to customers. Mastery, I think a maintenance team might have some more flexibility to invest in themselves and develop their capabilities, maybe not as much as under time pressure as a new product team is trying to hit some market deliverable. So maybe investing in this team to develop their individual skills is another way of motivating them. But I think probably what it comes down to most likely is this kind of sense of autonomy. The product is already built. Maybe they don't have as much autonomy in terms of choosing what they get to work on. I don't know if there's anything that could be done to increase the team's autonomy, give them some flexibility to choose what they work on, but that would be another thing I would look to try and increase the team's intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, in the early days of Google, that was the way that they determined whether or not a product was still viable, is whether or not the developers who were working on it were still excited to stay on the team. And so that if you couldn't attract people to the team, then pretty much, that kind of reflects the market as well, that the market probably isn't there as well. So if people bleed off, then maybe that's time for that product to go away. How about others? How would others who've been in this situation? I do have one other story in this space, which was I used to be on a maintenance team, and I loved the product I was working on. And I was actually told, because of reasons that they felt that my skills could be used on another team, that I had to give up that maintenance of that particular product. And I was actually taken off of it and put onto another team. And I didn't actually enjoy it. I enjoyed my old team better. So I think that gets into your autonomy part there, Dan, which is, I think it works both ways.
Yeah, and they stripped you of your sense of purpose. If you liked the product you were working on, that was meaningful to you, right?
Yeah. Hey, Matt, do you have something to add?
Ray? Yeah. So actually, one of the projects we're working on where I'm at is a very similar type of capability where we have a team that is maintaining this long-running program that's been around for almost a decade. But management is moving to, again, they're moving to the new shiny capability, investing a lot of resources into that. And when we go and say, hey, this piece of software that's, keeping the business running day to day and is keeping our customers happy, it needs some help with additional resources, and management's just like, yeah, we're not going to invest in that. We're putting all of our resources into the new thing. So keep the couple of folks that you have on this program, working it, and that's all you're going to get. So I guess, that's another situation where you kind of run into that, and it's very difficult to kind of work through that and keep your folks motivated.
So, then correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is all sounding like this is a management issue. Is that true?
I think, yeah. I mean, well, it's a priority issue, right? It's the management's priorities are in the new space, and their response has always been, well, do what you can to help our current customers, but we really want to focus our efforts into this new thing that we're working. This will replace this old piece of software, but which I kind of get that balancing where, hey, we want to make the investments in the new software, but how do you keep the stuff that's, bringing the, paying the bills, keep that continuing to be useful and helpful for the customers.
Right. Well, as an Agile coach, what would, if you're on an Agile team and you're actually helping to motivate the team, what are some things that you guys might want to do to help to reflect that? Let's say management's not doing it. Here, I'm the Agile coach. What can I do?
I would ask the value question mainly. How are the current efforts being driven based on what the leadership says are the most valuable initiatives, most valuable products to go after? Mm-hmm. It's easy to talk about the mechanics and the logistics, but if the decisions aren't being made based on what the value is, it's really hard to defend, and it's really hard to have the conversation framed correctly, I think.
I agree with that. I've seen certain teams, they'll read the reviews of the product, and they'll go through, and maybe there's, they connect with the product marketing or the customer call lines, and they'll get collections of, both the good stories and the bad stories of the current product. And they kind of read those through saying, hey, this helped me here, or this helped me here, kind of getting the customer insight a little bit closer about how this particular product might be solving their problems. That's helpful. As far as the priority thing that you're bringing up there, and that was Brian, I think, who said that.
Yeah.
I think that one of the dangers is almost, this ordinal view of business priorities, where you see the thing that's at the top of the list and you see the thing at the bottom, and it's that thing at the bottom that doesn't get enough of the airtime. And so I think it's the coach maybe reaching out to the leader saying, hey, I have a group of 100 people working on item 4. Could you give it a little bit more volume? Could you at least tell people how it feels to you, not do the sort of the butt sandwich, hey, you guys are doing great, but we got to still, that new thing up, the shiny object at the top. No, just try to isolate your conversation to really thanking this team for what they're doing. That way you can continue the motivation, because part of the thing that we're trying to do here is motivate people into liking their jobs in some regards. They'll dive off, and once you lose that core set of abilities there, then it's pretty tough to attract people to a maintenance team. Yeah,
and I agree that part of what the role of a leader is not just to make negative calls and cuts, and kind of the things we've talked about here sound like the negative side of things. It's really the leader's job to maintain a focus on what value is being brought by everything that's in the backlog and everything that's being worked by teams, either in a development phase or a maintenance phase. I think that's as much a role of management as setting direction and making slashes and cuts and redirections.
I hated that part of the job, to be honest with you. The making cuts and everything else, I think, depending on how large your organization is, for most, especially if you take very large organizations, some of those cuts just come, from the top. We're going to go down 20%, or we're going to go down some number, and the figuring out how you balance that off of, yes, the new shiny objects that people want you to work on, and the stuff that you still have to ship out the door in order to meet current commitments, is a very, very difficult thing. And maybe this gets into the leadership of how do you motivate? How do you continue to motivate people? Maybe this is something that there needs to be support groups for managers on.
Well, I think Dan really hit it on the head too. It's the intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers, and that's improved. That's bolstered. What came to mind when you were saying that was the idea of Gemba. And if just senior leaders would just simply show up and talk to people in the trenches and let them know, hey, the work you're doing here is very valuable.
So
that goes a long way.
So as a coach, how would you encourage that? I mean, some of this is about we motivate Agile teams to be, to practice Agile at a better level. But how do we, reach out into the management circle and help them to understand that? How would you approach that?
Well, I'm doing it right now, as a matter of fact. It's interesting. I'm trying to get FaceTime with a senior leader to let him know that he can't work in a vacuum. He has a tendency to like to kind of sequester himself off in his reserved conference room. And my pitch would essentially be that getting into the trenches, showing up face to face where people are doing work, to not only find out a little bit about the work, but also to make a personal connection with the people doing the work has tremendous value. And I would frame it, I think, in Pink's work. Sometimes it's just you can't motivate any more than you've already done with graphs and charts and technical talk. The FaceTime with a senior leader who says something as simple as, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing here, keep up the good work, goes a long way. And I think that just gets totally ignored sometimes.
I agree with that. Linda, did you have something to add to this?
Yeah, so I agree with your point that senior leaders tend not to spend time just kind of recognizing the efforts of teams. And, to their defense, I'd say that they got a lot of stuff to do on their own. So what I like to do with my role as a coach is, aside from the fact that you send status reports and they see charts and all this other stuff, is just do the drive-bys yourself. So I try to make it, my business to figure out, so just what times this person show up in the morning, what time do they leave, is there a time I can just sort of do a flyby myself and just pop in and have one nice thing to say about someone on the team and something they did. It doesn't even matter what it is. And say, hey, I wanted you to know Joe Schmo, did this coding thing yesterday and it was really awesome and got this feature done a lot quicker than we thought, whatever. And if you get a chance, on your way to your next meeting, can you just drive by and say hi to the team and tell them you heard about the good work that's going on, slap them on the back and keep going. And I've usually gotten really good response to that, as opposed to, can you come to our sprint review? Can you come to a meeting? All those things take time. I do the thing, drop a good message, and just feed it to them. Write it down on a little note here. You can go say this. And I've literally done this for CIOs, and just write it on one of our 3x5 cards. And then, they'll read it enough that they don't have to use the card when they see the person, right? And then they go by, see the person, say thank you. It doesn't take them 5 minutes of their day. They do it on a way to a meeting, and it's just a different way of trying to get the message out there. And
I agree.
To your point earlier, the leaders really have a huge influence on teams, and they don't recognize it, right? So that's the other thing. You've got to let the leader know how much it means to the team.
Well, there's a couple of factors in there which I've heard, and some of it I don't fully believe, but some of it I do, is the question of management by walking around. There's some criticism that I've heard that sometimes whatever the manager or the leader says somehow becomes, the POR, regardless of, whether or not it was a change in POR or not. So what I see is that there's been some coaching of leaders not to go interact with the teams with the fear that they might be, questioned and, quote, meddling and all of that. Role models that I've had in the past that are great leaders in this space, and I'll have to bring out Andy Grove because he actually 32 years ago taught my Welcome to Intel class when I was there. And, he would spend lunch with the rank and file. He wouldn't go sit with his people, his senior leaders at a table at a lunch crowd. He would actually go find a table of people who were doing the down at the floor work, and he enjoyed those conversations. A couple things that he did really well is he remembered everyone's name, and he was really good at that. I don't know how people can hold that in their brain. There's so many different people that he probably interacts with, but he was able to do that. The other thing, and this is something that is a criticism I've seen of certain managers, especially ones who walk around with the old BlackBerries originally and now with the iPhones, is be present in the conversations that you're having with people. I see so many times that when you go in and you get that moment of talking with a senior leader and they're just distracted. They're looking at their phone, they're looking at, something else, whatever the current squirrel in the room is. They're not focused on you. And some of the best leaders I've known really are giving you that 10 minutes. This is, I am going to have a conversation with you. And I'm going to block everything else that's in my brain, and I'm going to have that conversation with somebody. And I think those are always great leaders when I see them. So do we want to stay on this topic, or do we want to move on? Because the next one on the list is, what are the good and bad qualities of an Agile coach? Who would like to dive in on that one? Long pause. If we don't like this question, we can always move up to the next one. I know Adam would like that because this is the next one. Brian, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's just a really deep question. There's my mind's going 1,000 miles an hour just to pick the good and the bad. One of the, I would say, key good things that would differentiate a coach is a flexibility to the situation. So being able to move quickly between thoughts and situations, to tap into a very dynamic situation, and having the flexibility to pivot when it's required.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Ray, maybe just to shorten this conversation, we ought to take as a basis a good coach. Because if you say, what are the properties of a good Agile coach? Well, they're first and foremost a good coach. The interesting part of the question to me is, what above that makes a good Agile coach?
I don't disagree with that. So what would you think, Eric, would be a good coach?
I don't know. That's why the big silence at the beginning of this question. I was thinking, all right, what is it that separates an Agile coach from your garden variety coach? And I'm still chewing on that one. Is it just a good coach, or is there something special?
Well, if you think of coaching in the broader sense, what a coach does, what a coach can bring, I think there's still a little bit of body of disagreement with the degree in which you're coaching, mentoring, all the different skills that you bring together, facilitation, all those techniques that help the individual become what they want to become. And I put it back to the reference of the person, the coachee, I guess the coachee, that person is wanting to move in a particular direction, and the coach is helping them to be that,
Mm-hmm. But I think that's a coach. So what beyond a deep understanding of Agile and a lot of experience using Agile would differentiate an Agile coach from every other good coach?
Well, I guess what I'm struggling with in the question is, if you've ever seen, I'm trying to think of some of the movies of like, I think of, All That Jazz or Whiplash, examples of coaches that you just hate. They are, in fact, in both of those models, if you've seen both of those movies, or read the books or anything else. These are people who you absolutely hate. And I think it was people who work for Scorsese. It also said the same thing. This guy would coach you all the time, but he wouldn't coach you on the nice side. He would coach you with a big stick. And every single time you talk to an individual who went through that, they said that they were better because of that coaching, but they hate that person's guts. And I don't. That's not my view of coaching. Where you have the person who's in your face, who's bringing more out of you, but in the same regards is damaging you at the same time. So at least I can frame it in that perspective. What a bad coach would be.
You're still talking about bad coach, good coach, as opposed to bad or good agile coach. And I'm not coming up with anything outside of the domain knowledge and experience with agile that I would lay on the table and say that it's not just a good coach, it's also a good coach that does X, Y, or Z.
The one thing that comes to my mind as I ponder this question silently is that an agile coach probably needs to be able to work or build relationships at different levels of the organization. So he needs to jump in and sit down with the team and feel like one of the team members. But he also needs to be able to go up the chain of command and fight for the team he's coaching for. As we discussed in the previous topic, some things the team cannot handle for themselves. So you need to go and talk with their manager +1, manager +2, general manager, VP, whoever can make things happen to make the team more effective. And that's not necessarily required for coaches in other disciplines, I think, who just come in and work with people or the teams on developing specific skills.
So removing impediments, I agree that, if you think about helping team members by, working the environment around them so that they have the environment so that they can do the work or the resources necessary, I agree with that. But I think also with that, the skill that not just having the skill of understanding, the agile mindset or some of the methods. And by the way, no agile coach in this world can put all of the methods in their head and expect to be the uber coach that, comes in and knows everything. So I think there is that set of knowing your limitations. And, in sports, they've known this for years. You're going to be an outfield coach, or you're going to be the first base coach, or you're going to be, they understand that there is a skill around working a particular component of the game. And then, of course, you have the person who's overseeing the overall set of coaches in order to making sure that you have that right balance of skills in your coaching team as well. And so I think the good coach is also somebody in that when they know their limitations, they also know somebody to call. Who's that other coach that can help the person the rest of the way? And by the way, I think that's the same for leadership as well. There's no one leader that can, manage everything. They need to have a team of people and assemble a team of people in order to get the work done. Brian, what do you have?
Well, I think I landed on something this is a great question to tease out what I've been working through in my own head. I think a good agile coach can separate fact from the fiction and is listening deeply enough to the people he or she is coaching to hear what their messaging is, to hear what they're saying that is that fiction, and then has the ability to redirect, to shape, to deepen understanding, to move the person toward what the truth is, the fact is. You hear it all the time in things like daily stand-up meetings. Our daily stand-up meeting turned out to be, I'm just giving a status meeting to the Scrum Master. Well, that's really not a daily stand-up meeting. So that's the fiction. Well, what's the fact? You can redirect in your coaching to shape it out for that person to understand a little better.
I don't disagree with that. And I think this is, someone cornered me at an event a couple months ago, and they used two words that really were surprising to me. One was, this zealots. Then they said that most of the coaches that they had met were were these Agile zealots. And as they explored that word a little bit deeper, which is, sort of the by the book, got to do it this way, but also a misinterpretation of the book altogether. In the case of, you're saying with the daily stand-up, why is that pattern of people thinking that they need to talk to the Scrum Master so prevalent as an anti-pattern within our environment? Is there's something that must be facilitating that, something that must be, creating that zealousy that's in there. And I think you're hitting on a few of the, yes, you heard it that way or you've experienced that way, but let's talk about how it should really be. And I notice as I coach a coach, most of the time is I'm letting them understand to see their own anti-patterns. And it's really beneficial if people do get a mentor, because it does allow them to say, hey, come observe me and give me some pointers. So is that what you're sort of referring to when you're pointing out fiction? Are you pointing it out in yourself or are you pointing it out in others?
It's, as the coach, you're trying to do it for others. But I've recently experienced that I'm at this stage in the engagement I'm currently in where I'm just getting so frustrated. I just want to spit. And I recognize that zealousy that you're referring to comes from seeing and reading and listening to all the right ways to do it, and then observing the exact opposite day after day, and knowing the disparity between the two, but somehow maintaining your control and sanity over the disparity and being able to speak into it in a healthy manner.
Well, that's one of the benefits of this call, dude. You can vent a little bit. Linda, what did you want to add?
Yeah, so I think you bring up a good point about our personal emotions. We can't help but get involved personally in some of these things. And I think as a coach, one of the challenges I know I personally experience is how do I deflect that emotion in the moment, right? Make sure I stick with letting the team decide and ask them, is this useful for them? Is this stand-up useful for them? And if they say no, say, why not? And just take them through some appreciative inquiry and let them arrive at the same conclusion or probably a similar conclusion that you've come to. I think some of the frustration comes when we as coaches try to fix somebody's problem because we know it could be better. And the tough part is just to stand back and let them find it out on their own with our guidance, right? So that for me personally, the challenge is don't get personally involved in whatever their issues are. We all have issues, right? My role is to hold up that mirror and let them reflect and decide, so what do they want to do about it? And if they decide they like stand-ups that suck, then worry about some other issue, right? Help them out with whatever it is they are worried about.
Yeah, that's a beautiful metaphor, the holding the mirror up.
Yeah, I think to add to this, and I've seen some really great coaches out there who've done little, I have to say that they're kind of tricks. They're a little bit, ways of getting people to understand, like the daily stand-up is not my meeting, it's your meeting. It's the thing that you're using to communicate with your team members. I don't have any skin in the game here. I'm not, developing on this team. You are. I saw one coach one time, he would always place, at first, he would always place the daily, the Kanban board. He put it way on the other side of the office away from the team. And then eventually the team members going, why are we walking all this way to come to this board? Why can't we go put it over next to us? And he'd say, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a great idea. You should do that. But still kind of getting people in that mode of taking ownership of it. It's almost the same on comfort. And I think I've mentioned this before where, I will rarely pick up the pen and write on the whiteboard or write on a flip chart. I let others do that because they're the ones owning the process. And there's this uncomfortable stare of as we're all looking at the pen, who's going to pick up the pen? Like it's going to have needles shooting out of it if you pick it up. And, I think coaches who sit back a little bit and understand that the processes are not being done for your benefit, they're being done for them, and it's them who need to own it. And if they don't want to own it right now, maybe back to your point, Linda, maybe it's not the thing to fight. It's not the thing to go off and really push on at this point. How about others? Are we ready to pivot? I think we said some bad. We did say what are some of the bad qualities, and I think a couple mixes of some goods. Does anyone have any other good thing that they want to add? An example of a great Agile coach that they have? Now there goes the challenge right there. Maybe as a community, we need to start recognizing and highlighting, instead of the great methodologists that come up and we put them up on stage at our events. Maybe we should have, if any of you are going to the any Agile conference, maybe we need to have the coaching award of, best coach of the year, or, recognize a coach day or something, so that we can start to identify some great coaches that are out there. Maybe this is a challenge for us as we move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and pick.
Well, I was just going to say, I stumbled across something from Lisa Adkins, whose work I really enjoy. She's got a deck of cards that you can use to kind of recalibrate your thinking a little bit. Mm-hmm. And since I've been struggling probably last week or so, I just poked around on what those cards might contain. And I think the goodness of her coaching to me as a coach is that it just gave me a little breath, a little bit of new, rejuvenated perspective, and it's exactly what I needed.
That's awesome.
I think that's probably what a good coach can do too.
So find your avenues of those great examples, or just someone who can help to ground you a bit, which is good. Linda, you had something as well, and Eric.
Yes, the reason I really hadn't chimed in on what the good qualities were is because someone earlier had focused on how is an Agile coach different, and I think the things that make a good Agile coach are part of being a good coach, specifically to be a very good listener, and also to always keep your observer present in what's going on in meetings, any engagements with other people. I think those are two key qualities that without those, it's difficult to be a coach of any sort.
Wouldn't disagree. Eric?
I was just going to say that the discussion hasn't moved me from the initial opinion that a good Agile coach is a good coach who has a lot of Agile domain knowledge and experience. As I was listening to what people were saying, I was listening to it in the frame of, what if we were talking about the CMM in the mid-'80s? And everything I was hearing made sense within that frame of reference, as well as within an Agile frame of reference in 2017.
No disagreement. I guess the question for learning, I've heard, I've seen Lisa's work, I've seen others as well. Do you think as a community that we don't have enough avenues for learning this up?
Well, and there again, I would say, if this were 1987, would we be saying that same thing? And the answer is probably yes. It just seems to be a perennial issue that we don't take enough time to practice. We don't take enough time to learn. The structure of the environment sort of defeats a coach's best efforts, as several people have alluded to here.
Well, I've benefited from my my training and my work as a professional coach. So the International Coach Federation is a body that's typically teaching how to do professional life, business, leadership type coaching. And were it not for that training, my Agile coaching would be a lot weaker.
Yeah, I've heard some good things in that space. If you want to post the link to that in the chat line, that would be great, so others can go take a look. I know of a number of different people who've went through the program, and they do have a fairly rigorous program in order for you to achieve accreditation, I guess, or whatever they have as their. It's more of a practitioner's sense. You just don't take a 2-day class and then suddenly call yourself a coach. You actually have to go through a sizable amount of work to get that. So I hands off to anything that can actually, bring that out in a way that doesn't, just sort of short circuit it and make it just a cert class. So I agree with that one. So with that, we've got about 15 more minutes. Let's go ahead and move on. Adam, you have a question here. What are the online resources, Twitter, blogs, pages, podcasts, the must-watches for Agile practitioners? What are some of the ones that you know?
Other than this podcast? Let me highlight a couple of good ones, I think. I subscribe to Dave Snowden's blog, but sometimes, to be honest, I open it up and look at it and then close it off again and tell myself I'll read it tomorrow over coffee because it's very long and very interesting. I subscribe to stuff from Jürgen Appello just because he comes from a completely different angle, I think, than the core Agile work. And then for Twitter, I like Twitter because it's so ephemeral. And for Twitter, I mostly follow people I either know or I've heard them speak at conferences and thought they were saying interesting stuff, so I'll follow them. And I think that's my main strategy for finding things. So I was wondering what other people are following and looking for suggestions.
How about other people?
I'd give a big thumbs up to Ken Rubin's work. His website's inolution.com.
I can tell you that what I found with most, and this is not to discredit most of the blogs that are out there, I find that for myself, I like deeper learning. I like to, explore a topic a little bit deeper than just one subject matter expert. I like to go through many. And then I tend to kind of dig into the foundations of where they figured it out at, meaning that if I go to a blog site and I don't see references to where they learned it from and where they derived it from or where I can learn more about it, those tend to turn me off a bit, because I think we're in a world of there's very few new ideas. Most of them are foundational to, even most of the Agile methods are foundational to the 1960s and 70s type of work. But I want to go read those foundational pieces to see how they fit. But I think from an exploration-wise, I've been moving more out of the realm of what we have in the typical methods in Agile and starting to look at things like how do heuristics and other complexity theory move into how do we deal with uncertainty. And so some of the work in that space, and I know Eric is a big fan of this one as well, Billy Von Cohen's work, The Method, which is a pretty thick, meaty book to go off and read. But it's got some really great look at the way that we approach engineering, and as well as that kind of adjacencies. I still stay firmly connected to the test community, which still is out there, because I think that what we do in development is all of the disciplines, and typically when people say development, they still think of coding patterns and practices and architectural things. But I like to go spend time with people who know the dark arts of testing and the people who know the dark arts of DevOps and all these different adjacencies that might not be something that my Agile teams are doing today, and try to go learn up some places to go inspire people to, hey, maybe you should go read that as well. That was a little long-winded. How about others?
Well, the point you're making, Ray, is that learning in swim lanes is a really good idea. I've done this for many, many years. And you can read, if you're involved in Agile software development, you can be reading in the latest, greatest Agile wisdom and methods. You could be reading about software development. You could also be reading about things like culture change, because for the time being and for the foreseeable future, Agile is an exercise in culture change. So being smart about that is a good idea. You could also read in systems engineering and the complexity stuff you're mentioning. These are all, I tend to read with 2 or 3 books at a time in these swim lanes and just keep moving ahead in parallel so I don't get behind in any given segment.
That's an interesting perspective. Go ahead.
I agree. Who was the author of The Method?
Koen. Billy Von Cohen. Just look for discussion of the method.
Okay, thanks.
How about any other advice here?
So this is Linda. I'll chime in as much because I haven't heard any women's names mentioned, and I don't want to let this conversation go without giving a shout out to some of my sisters out there in coaching. And I do follow Ellen Gottesdiener, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Esther Derby, Diana Larson, Johanna Rothman, Linda Rising. And not only the ladies, but I tend to follow people who I consider to be leaders in their particular niche to see what they're up to these days. What's Ellen got going on in, requirements discovery? What's Linda Rising talking about patterns, right? What's Esther talking about teams and containers and things like that, right? As well as, I've recently read Kent's book on business requirements. So for me, I'm trying to follow people I consider to be leaders, and it just kind of changes from time to time. And I wanted to get a shout out to my girls too.
Oh, and I appreciate that because, if you think of some of the communities that I interact with, most of the names that you bring up, those are the people that I tend to gravitate around. And, I didn't mean to not call them out, but I think that when we think about diversity of topics and ideas, one of the challenges that we have is, especially in Agile, it's a very Western lens manifesto, and unfortunately, there wasn't that much diversity that was in the room when the manifesto was formed. So there are some gaps there that we need to really think of the full world. And as we know that as we do Agile adoptions in different countries, it's a completely different experience than, I can even say the West Coast of the United States and the East Coast of the United States are different, and you got to get that kind of full worldview in there and a diverse full worldview as well.
So, Ray, if we're doing a roll call, then I would also add to the list of wonderful contributions from women the work of Rebecca Wirfs-Brock on architecture. If people are not familiar with her work, it's absolutely worth diving into and reading. She has a brilliant mind and has done some fantastic stuff in software architecture.
Fully agree. With that, let's go ahead and close the call for this week. Again, this podcast will go up sometime this afternoon time frame. Please point it out to your friends. We're picking up a lot of people up on the the replays. I know that it's been listened to across the planet, so I appreciate everyone here who comes in and participates. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your week, and see you in 2 weeks.